Let me take you back to my 21st birthday. We're in my hometown in Minnesota, in the same Total Wine I'd been kicked out of a few months earlier for being under 21. I had no idea what I was looking for or where to find it, but I now had my golden ticket in hand. Literally. I had a yellow sheet of paper stating that I was 21 and that my real driver's license would be mailed to me in 2 weeks. Eventually, I found my way through the many rows of different types of bottles and cans until I found the whiskey. Now, I had already been watching whiskey reviews for a short while before turning 21 with a friend of mine because we both liked the idea of drinking whiskey. So I knew a handful of names, but in a Total Wine, I was easily overwhelmed. I quickly realized that the little money I had meant that I had to look at the lower shelves. That's where I noticed a box with a name I actually recognized. I didn't know anything about what it tasted like or if I would enjoy it, but I remembered the fantastic story surrounding that name. A tale of how everything that could go wrong does go wrong in the harshest environment on the planet. That was what made me purchase my first bottle of whiskey. My name is Ryan Heinzen, and I'm now a whiskey sommelier and have been working in a whiskey bar in Tennessee for the past 2 years. There's some bar patrons who still come in and throw back a shot, but it's the regulars I'm more interested in. Many of them would tell you that I've helped teach them about whiskey and even their own taste, but I've learned even more valuable lessons from them. These customers have shown me that the experience of a drink is just as important as what's in the glass. Now, some bartenders have an amazing flair for physical feats, tossing and spinning a bottle around, all while creating a fantastic drink and filling their patrons with a sense of wonderment. I can't do that. I've never been the kind of person who seeks the spotlight, but I do like to think I have a flair for storytelling. And it turns out, most people are bad at remembering the subtle differences in tasting notes between two similar bottles of whiskey. But just like me, they do remember a good story. Behind every bottle is hundreds of stories, every step starting from growing grain until it reaches your glass. This spirit is collecting experiences and stories that would love to tell you. It's my goal to sift through these stories, find the most meaningful, and bring them forward to your attention. This isn't another whiskey review channel or show. This is pure storytelling. I won't analyze every detailed tasting note of the spirit in the bottle. Instead, I'll dive into the details of the spirit behind the bottle. And this is the spirit of Shackleton. For this story, we jump back to the year 1914. Charlie Chaplin has just made his first debut in film. The Ford Motor Company paid $5 for a whole 8-hour workday. Archduke Franz Ferdinand has been assassinated, which will ultimately result in the First World War. And most important to this story, we're in the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. This would test the physical and mental limits of those who dared to push the boundaries of the unknown, but resulted in the mapping of the continent's coastline and findings that would keep the scientific community busy for decades. The main goal of many of these expeditions, however, wasn't for science. It was for the glory. The glory of being the first person to reach the South Pole. This is the motivation of our story's hero, Sir Ernest Shackleton. There's only one small problem. The South Pole has already been reached at this point. It was reached 3 years ago. Roald Amundsen has already succeeded. Sure, Shackleton had a shot back in 1907 with a ship aptly named the Nimrod and trying to use ponies, which didn't work. And somehow it still got him closer than anyone had come before, but not quite to the pole. His record stood for less than 3 years. So, now what's a brave explorer who's been training for Arctic conditions supposed to do? Climb a mountain? No, not Shackleton. He's creative. He knows exactly how he's going to one-up Amundsen. He's going to attempt to go through the pole to the other side of that giant sheet of ice, all in a straight line. The journey became known as the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, which remained, as Shackleton declared, to be the one great main objective of Antarctic journeyings. It is worth saying that this was chosen by Shackleton, and both the name and the quote were intended to help sell the idea of grandeur that was all very necessary for the first hurdle of this expedition: fundraising. Shackleton estimated that this monumental journey would require £50,000, which is equivalent to over $6.5 million today. And that would only be enough to fund the most basic version of his plan. To acquire this funding, Shackleton pleaded with the British government, and thanks to his previous expeditions being so well known at the time, he also gained the attention of wealthy individuals who would help back his plan. It's worth pointing out as well that in this time period, Antarctic explorers were their equivalent of astronauts, completing tasks once thought to be impossible and an environment that simply cannot support human life. Shackleton's earlier failed expedition on the Nimrod had been the closest anyone had gotten to the pole before Amundsen, and he was still known as a hero. After all, he is Sir Ernest Shackleton. If he can command a crew of explorers in the Arctic, then of course he can command the respect of high society. For this next part of our story, I like to picture just about any cheesy action movie. We cut to our heroes sitting at a table with a few of these high and mighty aristocrats who aren't quite on board as investors. Shackleton is leaning back in his chair, calm and collected, as he explains his plan with maps and models, explaining how the funding he acquired would be used to pay for 2 ships, the first of which is named Endurance, on which he and his crew would travel to Antarctica, the second of which, Aurora, would sail to the opposite side of the continent and travel south towards the pole to leave supply drops en route of the expedition, and eventually help with the party's return journey. The plan would also therefore require 2 crews to sail the ships, consisting of 28 men per ship, and supplies for these men. At this point, the investors would be starting to believe this could be done, but one would remain skeptical. He would point out that those waters are full of hard ice floes, a death sentence, and that you would have to be mad to willingly join this crew. And Shackleton would smile. This is where we are introduced to the rest of our main cast of characters, smash-cutting names with a quick backstory. There's Frank Wilde, the second in command, who Shackleton would explain had been a member of his earlier expedition teams, and earned his trust and friendship. Frank Worsley would be appointed the captain of the Endurance, which Shackleton would undoubtedly say he fits the doubtful investor's claim that you'd have to be mad to volunteer to sail in these rough waters, as Worsley came to Shackleton claiming to have had a dream of navigating icebergs drifting down Burlington Street. So naturally, the next day he went to Burlington and saw Shackleton's advertisement. Taking this as a sign, mere minutes later, he had the job. Then there's carpenter Harry McNish, who said he was attracted by the advertisement, and while he was a well-respected carpenter, Shackleton did state he was the only man I'm not dead certain of. These 3 men, along with Shackleton and 24 others, would make up the crew of the Endurance and secure the investment from our lofty skeptic. Now all that was left was putting this meticulously crafted plan into action. On December 5th, 1914, the Endurance departed a whaling station in South Georgia Island towards the Antarctic. Despite warnings from the whalers that the waters were full of pack ice, making navigation difficult. After only 2 days, the ship's progress would already be slowed by having to maneuver around this ice, and a week after that was thick enough to stop the ship for a full 24 hours. After losing a full day of travel, you have to imagine how frustrating it would be for Shackleton and the crew when, only 3 days later, they were stuck again. Shackleton even referred to the sea conditions as evil, and then went on to further complain that he was hoping that at least the ice would be loose. However, instead it was in obstinate character. On January 15th, 1915, over a month after the ship left port in South Georgia Island, they finally had reached a suitable landing spot. However, Shackleton declared that would be too far north. He wanted to make as much progress south as possible on the ship before having to make the remaining trek on foot. However, as a gale wind developed, he would start to regret that decision. These Arctic winds would force the Endurance and its crew to take shelter behind a berg. When the winds had finally calmed and they eventually left this protection and once more entered the pack ice, this time the ice was different from the hard ice that they had encountered previously. This was very thick but soft ice. I'm going to break the immersion of our story for 1 second, just to explain what happens next. Well, researching everything I could find about this journey, I created a timeline with key dates to help me organize and lay out how I want to write this. What happens next, I could find no exact date for, because it happens so slowly over several days, so all of the reference material that I found just listed it as happening in January. While I can't give a specific date, I can say that it appears to have happened in the time between two events that take place in January 18th and the 24th. What happened during that 6-day period was that the gale winds started back up and had pushed the soft ice against the hull of the ship, compressing it and hardening the ice until the ship was lodged firmly in what appeared to be an endless floor of ice on all sides. And this is where we'll leave our story for now. If you're hearing this, that means I think of you as my friend, and I trust your input. So, as a friend, I'm going to ask you for 2 favors. The first is to give me your honest opinion about any part of this, whether it's about the sound quality, writing, or anything else. I want to hear your thoughts. And secondly, I need you to keep me accountable. Unfortunately, I keep pushing this project to the back burner. So if you enjoyed this teaser of what's to come, I need you to keep asking me about creating more and help me stay motivated to keep this project moving. I cannot wait to share with you the rest of this amazing story, and we're only now getting to the real intense parts after establishing the background. I hope that you've enjoyed this so far, and I look forward to hearing from everyone on what they thought. Until next time, I'm Ryan Heinzen, and thank you for listening.